Let's keep it going. The other marquee top 10 matchup, and it's funny, right? It is Penn State at Michigan. Again, a top 10 matchup in this crazy weekend of college football that we're about to get. And I think what's interesting about this this Penn State-Michigan matchup, Michigan is a 7-point favorite in the Betfred Sportsbook, the over under 51.5. What I do think is important in this game is what I just said a second ago about Tennessee. We know very much who Tennessee is. Tennessee offense, fast paced, Hendon Hooker, pass rush is good, pass defense isn't very good. I don't know how much we really know about Penn State or Michigan. Penn State, listen, I think we all love them after that Auburn game. I include myself in the mix on that. I would also say, though, Auburn is pretty bad ever since then. And so I think how much of how we feel about Penn State, how much of that is determined by the fact that they destroyed an Auburn team that we now know is terrible. On the flip side, Michigan, listen, 6-0, have yet to play a ranked team. Probably the best team they played was Maryland. They struggled to put away Maryland 34-27. Credit to them. But then also, last week in Indiana, it was 17-10 going into the fourth quarter before Michigan eventually pulled away. And so as I look at these two teams, I do think we're going to learn a lot about them. I think we're going to learn a lot about one specific player in this game, and that is Michigan quarterback J.J. McCarthy. And so, listen, I'm not anti-J.J. McCarthy. I'm not saying they picked the wrong guy. Even if they did, Cade McNamara's not available, so he would have been the quarterback anyway. But what I would say is, and I give credit to Jim Harbaugh, I give credit to their offensive coaching staff. They have done a good job to date of making sure J.J. McCarthy doesn't beat him, keeping him out of harm's way. Last 3 games since he was officially named the starter, 243 yards rushing against Maryland. Thank you, Blake Corum. 172 yards rushing against Iowa, 165 yards rushing against Indiana. And when you look at the national rankings in terms of stats, in terms of rushing yardage, Blake Corum's pretty high on the list. 735 yards rushing. That is 4th most in college football right now. And so Michigan, to its credit, they know who they are. They know who their identity is. They play slow. They play physical. My favorite stat, time per play. In other words, how long goes between one snap to the other. They're towards the bottom of college football, which means they like to chew up the clock and slow things down. I think they know who they are. I think what I've also seen from J.J. McCarthy is a guy that can be a little bit erratic with the football when he's asked to do too much. I always go back to it. That Michigan State game last year, J.J. McCarthy had a fumble late. Looked a little spotty in that Maryland game early in the year. And so this is where it gets interesting because Penn State has by far, what did I just tell you about Michigan, right? Michigan wants to run the ball right at you, take the ball out of J.J. McCarthy's hands. Penn State has by far the best run defense that Michigan has faced all year. How about this? Top 5 nationally in rush defense right now, giving up 78 yards per game, just 3 total rushing touchdowns allowed, and less than 3 yards per carry on the season. And so I give Penn State a ton of credit. That defense is legit. That defense is going to make J.J. McCarthy make plays, and I don't know if he is capable of doing that. Beyond that, what I would also say, I think it's really interesting when Penn State has the football as well. Because the one thing about Penn State, I think they're finally starting to get an identity. If you go back to last year, do you remember Penn State? Do you remember how bad that rushing offense was for Penn State last year? Everybody remembers the win-loss record. I think a lot of people forget, and we're going to talk about it in a minute, that Sean Clifford got hurt. Penn State last year was ranked 118th nationally in rushing yardage. They were terrible running the ball. This year, they're ranked 33rd in the country, in large part thanks to Nicholas Singleton, the true freshman. Listen, you want to know what a 5-star that rushed for like 4,000 yards during his high school career looks like? It's Nick Singleton. He was awesome at Auburn, 140-something, 24 yards against Auburn, 87 a few weeks ago against Northwestern. And I look at this Penn State team and I say, man, this is a team. They appear to be able to run the football, but they're kind of like Michigan as well. They play, this will be the best run defense that Penn State has faced all year, and it will be interesting to see if they are able to move the ball as successfully as some of these other teams. One other note on Penn State, and I think this is important. We talked about this a lot on last week's show. Penn State is coming off of a bye. I do think at this time on the calendar, that is a really, really, really important thing. I really do think that with Penn State coming off of a bye, with their ability to run the football, with their ability to potentially make JJ McCarthy make plays, here's the other variable too. I don't think enough people talk about. Let's go back to last year for half a second on this team, okay? Everybody remembers Michigan made the playoff. Everybody remembers Penn State stunk. They finished 7-5. Here's what I think a lot of people forget, though, and I do think this is really important when it comes to this game. Penn State did finish 7-5, but as I've told you many times, Penn State also, if you remember, and I think this is important, Penn State lost. They did lose Sean Clifford in the middle of the season. He got hurt in that Iowa game. They were up 70-3 against Iowa. They end up losing that one. Less than 100% the next week at Illinois, back-to-back losses. The point I'm trying to bring up, 7 losses last season, 5 of them, or 5 losses last season, 4 of them came by 4 points or less. You go back to Penn State last year. Here are their losses. And oh, by the way, you know what one of their losses was last year by 4 points or less? It was to Michigan in a game that they led with 4 minutes left in this game. I believe this is an even matchup. I believe that it's balanced, and I believe that Penn State can pull out the outright upset. The other thing to keep in mind in this one, and I do think this part's important, these games have historically been very low scoring. Last year, Michigan won 21-17. That's a total of what, 38. Penn State won 27-17 in the COVID year. That is a 45-44 total. 28-21, that's a 49 total. So you go down the list, the over-under 51.5, that's a pretty juicy number. History tells us it's going to go under. But I also think Penn State is tough. I think this is the game where Penn State, I'm going to talk about this on the Aaron Torres podcast on Friday. This is the game that I do kind of think. We went into last week having a lot of questions about Tennessee. We came out saying, oh, that's a really good team and a potential playoff threat. I do think there's a scenario where we could have the same with Penn State. Veteran quarterback with Sean Clifford, who I've barely talked about. Run game helps Sean Clifford. I think Penn State keeps it close in Ann Arbor. Let's rip through the rest of the week 7 slate in college football. We got to the three big ones earlier: Alabama, Tennessee, Penn State, Michigan, Utah, USC. Utah, USC is one of the evening kickoffs. How about this for another evening kickoff that is worth monitoring and worth enjoying? Clemson on the road at Florida State was once one of the great rivalries, not only in the ACC, but in all of college football. Florida State's been down. Florida State is probably a little bit better than they have been, although they're coming in on a 2-game win streak. Clemson, a 3.5-point favorite in the Betfred Sportsbook. And oh, by the way, the over-under in this one feels a little bit high to me at 51. Let's get into it. Let's discuss this game, because I got to ask you a very simple question. Is there any team in college football that is just going out every week, taking care of business, no drama, right? Georgia has drama. Alabama has drama. Michigan, even a couple of their games are kind of like, what's gonna possibly? No, Clemson's just going out and destroying everybody, and nobody's talking about them. And I know it's the ACC, and I know it's whatever. But obviously, look, I guess I shouldn't say they're destroying everybody. They did need overtime against Wake Forest. But the week after that, they take care of NC State at home. The week after that, they beat Boston College on the road. And so I would just love to know how many teams right now in the last 3 weeks, 2 top 25 wins, 2 conference road wins. And I know Boston College isn't great, but they're a really, really, really good team. And on top of that, I think they're doing it for 2 reasons. One, let's just give a little credit to DJ Uiagalelei, okay? Let me give credit to DJ here, and I butchered his name, and I apologize. It's a mental hurdle right now. I used to know how to say it, now I don't. But we criticized DJ all offseason. We criticized DJ early in the year again after that Georgia Tech game. He's not the guy. Put in Cade Klubnik. You realize he is currently thrown 14 touchdowns and 2 interceptions this season, midway point of the season. This after he threw 9 touchdowns and 10 interceptions a year ago. Already surpassed his touchdown total in half of the season that he had all of last year in 13 games. And he's doing it, the completion percentage isn't amazing, but 64% completion percentage, throwing the ball downfield. Bo Collins has established himself. So that's one reason why Clemson has stepped up. The other reason, their defense, I don't think people realize. And by the way, this is part of why I'm critical of Brent Venables. You look at Brent Venables right now at Oklahoma. Lincoln Riley's rolling at USC in year 1. The Clemson defense is insane without Brent Venables. So was it a Brent Venables thing, or was it a Clemson has really good players thing? But I only bring it up because, have you seen what Clemson's defense has done the last 2 weeks? Okay, so 2 weeks ago they play NC State at home. Really good team, top 25 matchup. This is what they did specifically on the ground to NC State. They gave up 34 yards on 21 carries. Last week against Boston College, gave up 25 yards on 30 carries. Not great at math, but according to my math, that is 59 yards allowed on the ground in 51 attempts in the last 2 games. Absolutely insane. I don't think Clemson is getting nearly enough credit for just how awesome they have been, specifically in the run defense. And because of that, that is where I worry a little bit about Clemson, or about Florida State coming into this one. Because Jordan Travis, really talented dual threat quarterback, but Jordan Travis is a guy that likes to beat you, and Florida State in general is a team that is better running the ball than they are passing it. Top 25 run defense or run offense nationally. Passing offense is closer to top 50 overall. And so this is a Florida State team that really does prefer to try to beat you on the ground, and I'm just not sure that they're going to be able to do it. Jordan Travis, again, really talented player, but he's only completing about 63% of his passes, 9 touchdowns, 3 interceptions this year. And I do worry if they can't really get things rolling. If they can't get things rolling in the pass game, are they going to be able to slow down, or are they going to be able to move the ball, period, against Clemson? Keep it going from the Clemson perspective. DJ's playing really well. This is a very good Florida State pass defense. The run defense has struggled, though, and I do believe Clemson will be able to move the ball. Do like Clemson minus 3.5. That is in the Betfred Sportsbook. I do like Clemson to cover this game. Let's keep it going, and it shows you how good the slate is in college football this week. We are now 5 games in, and I'm just now talking about LSU Florida. Now, I don't think either of these teams is really that good this year, but when you're talking about one of the great rivalries in the SEC in college football, 2 teams that have won multiple national championships this century, and they're the fifth best game this weekend at best. We got ourselves a fun Saturday. In the Betfred Sportsbook, Florida is a 2.5 point favorite going into this one. The over under in this one is 50.5. And I got a few questions. First of all, with LSU, I don't really know exactly what to make of them. Now, look, they're coming off the really bad loss to Tennessee. And I think everyone will say, oh, they stink, and Brian Kelly stinks, and Brian Kelly's the worst, and blah, 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 and this and that. Okay. I get all that. I really, truly do. At the same time, if you just take out two, I just talked about this with USC and Stanford, but if you take out just two plays from that Tennessee LSU game last week, it's a little bit different, right? Opening play of the game, LSU muffs the punt, Tennessee recovers 7 points right there. Right before the half, Brian Kelly, some weird timeout, clock management stuff, allows Tennessee to get the ball back. They get in field goal range. They kick a field goal. That's 10 points right there. So LSU loses to Tennessee 40-17. And I'm not saying that 30-17 is that much better. It does feel a little bit different. And again, those are two plays that we're talking about that completely changed how we perceive the game. And so when I look at LSU, I don't think they're quite as bad as they were against Tennessee. But I think it's also worth monitoring and worth noting. Like their two wins, their two SEC wins so far, they easily could have lost. Fell down 17-0 to Auburn, ended up coming back to win 21-17. And then they did beat Mississippi State in a game that they trailed going into the fourth quarter. So I don't love LSU, but I do like LSU. The talent is there, especially at the skill positions. And I do think there's an important injury update here. Will Campbell, their starting left tackle, was out for Tennessee. If you saw it, that Tennessee pass rush just killed Jaden Daniels. But he is expected back for this game, or at least a report from Brian Kelly indicated that he might be. From the Florida perspective, I have a couple thoughts as well. To me, it's almost like a tale of two games against Tennessee when I look at this game, because I think we all look at LSU, oh, they're terrible. They got destroyed by Tennessee. And then there's the Florida perspective of they almost beat Tennessee. Maybe they're not as bad as we think. No, I think they're as bad as we think. And when I go back to that game, I kind of have one pretty straightforward question. Is Anthony Richardson that good of a quarterback, or did he just have one great game against Tennessee a few weeks ago? Because I went back and looked up the stats. I said, I don't really feel like Anthony Richardson has been that good except in that game. Well, I went back and looked it up. How about this for some stats? How about this? We have in the for Anthony Richardson, these stats blew me away. Threw for 453 yards and 2 touchdowns in the win over Florida State. In his 4 other games against FBS opponents, Utah, Kentucky, South Florida, Missouri last week, he's thrown for 489 yards with 1 touchdown and 5 interceptions. So 453 yards against Tennessee. The Utah, Kentucky, South Florida, Missouri games combined 489 yards with 1 touchdown and 5 interceptions. Listen, I don't try to tear down young guys. They're all doing their best. I just don't think he's a very good quarterback, at least not right now. I like LSU. I think the wrong team is favored. This will be one of my Betfred best bets. I do like LSU plus 2.5. A couple other games, and we'll get out of here. A quick second segment on this show. Mississippi State down to a 4-point favorite at Kentucky. They were up about 7.5, 8, but it appears as though Will Levis will play in this game. I guess my question with Will Levis, is it a little bit of the Bryce Young corollary when I look at Will Levis playing in this game? In other words, I just talked about Bryce Young to lead the show. Even if he plays, if he's nowhere close to 100%, what does that really mean for Alabama? And I think it's exacerbated that much more for Will Levis in Kentucky. We saw what Kentucky looks like with Will Levis last week. Well, what are they going to be if he's on the field but at 40, 50%? And it's the same Bryce Young conversation that we had as well. If Bryce Young was limited to a pitch count on Tuesday, Wednesday in practice, I don't believe he can be 100% come Saturday. If Will Levis wasn't healthy enough to play at all last week with a foot injury, now he's going to be running all over the field making plays. So an immobile Will Levis, the Kentucky run game is terrible, worst in the SEC, 92 yards per game, 4 touchdowns in 6 games. I think they struggle against a really good Mississippi State team. And Mississippi State's really interesting. By the way, if you listen to this show in the summer, the over-under win totals, if you remember, I talked about this. I said Mississippi State was 6.5. I said my favorite over-under win total in the entire SEC. Mississippi State right now is 5-1. Their only loss was to LSU. The LSU loss They led going into the fourth quarter. And remember, they were coming off of a trip to Arizona the week before. So they played Arizona in a night game, flew back. It was an 11 Eastern, 10 Central kickoff, fly back, then have to go play at LSU the next week. And they led going into the fourth quarter. Outside of that, Mississippi State is 5-0. And they're not only 5-0, they've got double-figure wins in all of those games. 26-point win against Memphis, 19-point win against Arizona, 31-point win against Bowling Green, obviously the 18-point win against Texas A&M, and a 23-point win against Arkansas. It's one of the top probably 12, 13 teams in the country. We talk about Ole Miss. We talk about, whoever. Tennessee is the second, third, fourth best team behind Alabama and Tennessee in the SEC. Is it possible that Mississippi State might be the third best team in this league? Speaking of the SEC, let's quickly go through the other big one. Auburn at Ole Miss. Talked about this on Thursday's Aaron Torres pod. Ole Miss is a 16-point favorite in the Betfred Sportsbook list. Auburn's not winning this game. The only question is, can they make it respectable? And there's a very interesting note. There's two very interesting notes on this. One, Auburn thinks they can get Lane Kiffin as their next head coach. I don't know if I believe that, but could this be an audition for Lane Kiffin? Two, how about this? Auburn is 13-3 all-time in Oxford. The only three losses came in 98, 08, 2008, and 2012. You know what happened at the end of each of those seasons? Auburn's coach got fired. So keep an eye out for that. I think Ole Miss wins. I would probably pick them to cover. But yeah, man, fascinating game. Speaking of fascinating game, Minnesota, a 6.5-point favorite against Illinois. Listen, we got to give Brett Bielema some credit, man. Brett Bielema right now, as we record here, Illinois is I think their over-under win total was 3.5, 4 wins, something like that this year. They're 5-1, obviously destroyed Wisconsin. Last week, they beat Iowa 9-6. They play real defense at Illinois. Number 2 in the country in total defense. By the way, you know who's number 1? Yeah, it's Minnesota. That's why in this game, the over-under is 39. Neither of these teams play very fast in terms of time of possession. We've talked about it quite a bit, with Minnesota. Minnesota is number 1 in time of possession, even ahead of some of the service academies, Air Force, Navy, Army, etc. Illinois, number 7. So you talk about a slow, low-scoring, physical game. I don't know if I can take Minnesota, minus the points here as almost a touchdown road favorite. Credit Illinois. Do think there is an interesting one also in the Big Ten West. Purdue hosting Nebraska. It's weird. Purdue, Illinois, and Nebraska. How about that? All tied atop the Big Ten West standings. Nebraska, of course, coming off back-to-back wins. But Purdue a 13.5-point favorite. No super strong opinions on this one, but Purdue's playing really well. I think it's easy to sit here and say Purdue, they stink, who cares? Remember, they lost opening night to Penn State in a game that they were in control of. They lost to Syracuse. We didn't know it at the time. Syracuse is pretty good. Since then, Purdue has taken care of Minnesota and Maryland. Purdue might be the best team in the Big Ten West. Watch out. Speaking of Syracuse, how about them? How about those Syracuse Orange? Hosting a top 20 matchup at I don't know what it's called now, the JP Wireless Dome. It's always the Carrier Dome to me, okay? But Syracuse, one of the best stories in the sport, a 3.5-point favorite against NC State. No super strong opinions there. Syracuse, I think we think of Dino Babers as this offensive savant. It is actually their defense which is carrying them so far. A top 10 defense nationally, 271 yards per game allowed. I like Syracuse in that one. Quiet Pac-12 after dark week. Obviously, we have the USC-Utah game, but outside of that, not a ton of late-night football. Oregon State is a 3.5-point favorite against Washington. No super strong opinions there. Remember, Oregon and UCLA are on a bye. They play next week in Eugene. That's a big one. Notre Dame, a 17-point favorite against Stanford. If you have a strong opinion on that one, good for you. It is a stay away to me. With that said, I think that's it for this episode of College Football Betting. If you're not subscribed, please make sure to do so. Apple, Spotify, Amazon Music, Google Music. Go to the YouTube channel. If you can do me that solid, go to the YouTube channel. I really would appreciate you helping your guy out over on the YouTube channel for College Football Betting. Also, make sure to rate and review the show. If you could also, that'd be huge. Give us a quick 5 stars. Let people know. Helps us move up the charts, all that good stuff. And finally, make sure you're following me on Twitter at Aaron_Torres. Follow me on Instagram at Aaron Torres Pod. Great show this week. Fun show this week. We will be back on next Thursday with a Week 8 preview. As I told you, a couple big ones next week. We got Ole Miss at LSU. We got on top of that, on top of the Ole Miss game, we also have the Oregon and UCLA game. So a lot of fun games. Alabama will be back. We'll see what happens with them this week against Tennessee. They play Mississippi State, what could be a top probably 10-12 matchup. Really fun weekend ahead. I appreciate all of you. I'll be back next week.